Lynn, the next question comes from the Stanford Group. The effective corporate tax rate for the top 20 firms in the U.S. is currently under 2%. There's more that could be said about this, but the bottom line is that the effect has been to create a trained professional class of retainers who devote themselves to preserving the existing system. Furthermore, there were massive frauds in the origination of mortgages, in the rating processes that led to securitization, and in the credit default swaps that were supposed to insure against loss. In the policy approach so far, there has been a consistent failure to address, analyze, remedy, and above all, prosecute these frauds. And our insistence that our government would not see any restoration of public trust until this occurred has fallen on deaf ears in Washington. The bottom line is that fundamental reform and any kind of bottom-up recovery strategy of the source that we've proposed is blocked from the outset. Obama has his equivalent of Lewis Douglas, the conservative budget director under FDR. But there is nobody in Washington, at least, who is prepared to play the roles of Harry Hopkins, Harold Ickes, and Francis Perkins, who were the architects of the New Deal employment policy, of public works, and of improved labor conditions. Meanwhile, major legislation from health care to bank reform continues to be written in consultation with lobbyists. One example is that the legislation on credit default swaps was actually prepared by Jamie Dimon and his lobbyists. The fact, though, is that above all else, what we see as the greatest danger in being able to shape any policy under these current circumstances is that the market has come to substitute for the functions of the state. And without the state, the concept of the public interest disappears from all policy. Markets, by definition, serve private interests. With that said, however, banks are institutions that are chartered by public authority to serve public purpose. It's clearly understood, both in U.S. law and in practice, that banks have responsibilities as well as rights, and that the state has power over the conduct of banks, including the power and the duty to take them over and run them when they're troubled enough to threaten the public guarantee that lies behind bank deposits. Financial markets, on the other hand, especially the shadow banking system that we see today, exist to place in the domain of private market transactions what previously existed in a clearly defined relationship to public purpose. They escape both regulation and insurance, and the result has been to vitiate the concept of public service, creating in banks privileged and power market-oriented institutions that use and largely control the state rather than respond to it. Now, all of us seem to agree that this system needs reform. Even Geithner and Summers have written articles to this effect. But the question is, what changes will actually count as fundamental? We've arrived at the conclusion that there will be no fundamental change unless and until we agree on two basic things. Number one, that laws were broken and that the lawbreakers must be prosecuted. If they are not prosecuted, then there is absolutely nothing that would serve as a deterrent for them to do it all over again. Number two, It is our contention that it must be stated clearly and without compromise that banks are institutions that are chartered by public authority to serve public purpose. They have no other function in the American Republic. We know that this is a position that is going to lead to a tremendous outcry, and we're probably all going to be denounced as a bunch of wild-eyed radicals. But we really don't see any other way to address this, and we'd like your comments on whether or not you think we're in the right direction.
There is a great movement in the United States today, which erupted in the month of August, which I've characterized scientifically as a mass strike. It's clear that over 60% of the American public has arisen in a strike, a protest against what it hates. First of all, in the person of the President of the United States, and secondly, in most of the members of the Congress and both houses. This is a phenomenon which is poorly understood by most people, but I understand it very well because I've studied my history. This is a genuine mass strike. The most recent example, as a precedent for this, happened in East Germany in 1989, when the people of the East Germany, especially from Saxony, rose up and said, "Wir sind das Volk." We are the people. And the DDR regime collapsed. And the whole Soviet system went into a process of disintegration. We had a similar event throughout the cities of the United States during the month of August. A true mass strike. Not a protest movement, a mass strike. The characteristic of these things, as I saw the tapes of them, the videotapes of them, the people said, "Shut up. Listen to what we say. We don't want to hear what you have to say. We're telling you." And they are still saying it. Over 60% of the U.S. citizenry despises the current president, but treats him with respect despite despising him, because they want to achieve the dignity of exerting their rights as citizens. And the health care issue is the number one issue. Right? So now look at all the other issues. When the American citizen rises on his hind legs and says, "We are the people," you son of a bitch. Which I think a great number of them said, in effect, what I saw on the television shots of this thing. Then you have the exertion of the ultimate power of government under a republic, a true republic. The power does not lie with the majority of the vote. The majority of the vote's not worth anything. You can buy it. As that's the way most of our people got into Congress. They bought the vote. There was no moral expression in this. Oh, there was some hints of this and that. But the vote was bought with money. And the politicians went to people with money and said, "Buy us, buy us, we'll be yours. Give us the money, we'll buy us, we're for sale." And that's how this kind of problem arises. But then suddenly, everything is under control. We fixed the election. We got this bum in. This bum is now employing these policies, which we hate. What are we going to do? How do we protest? Do we go to our representatives and ask him to represent us? This prostitute is going to teach us sex life? No, we say, we are the American people, and you have just made it very plain to us that you are not one of us. You don't represent us. See, this is what the American Revolution was. And the problem is that people don't understand classical culture at all. They think classical culture is something you study in a university, which they should study in a university, but they really don't. They do the same thing in universities they do in election campaigns. Vote for us, and you get it, I mean, it's mostly fakery. But the essential thing is that there is a phenomenon where a people, and this occurs repeatedly in history, as in the case of the American Revolution, where a people recognizes a sense of a common interest as human beings of a certain culture, a certain political culture, or a certain group of cultures. Recognize we are human beings. What's the interest of a human being? What are the rights of a human being? As opposed to some kind of slave or hired servant or something. And where they suddenly get a sense of what is it that we really want? What is the principle, the dynamic that unites us in a common sense of what we really want and should have as a right? The assertion of the natural rights of a people. And this comes in a form that's described by Shelley. I've often referred to Shelley, but he's not the only one. He just was most best known in the English language. Is the defense of poetry, the concluding part of that. Is that there are periods in history in which the people are seized in large numbers by a certain sense of a common interest, a common moral interest, a common conceptual interest. And at such times, the people find themselves capable of being united in a common purpose by a force which they don't fully understand, but whose validity they recognize. And this comes out in the expression of our rights, our mission, our purpose. We're no longer going to be in a slum. We're going to decide to move upward. We decided that it's our right and obligation to do this. And they say, well, if this is the moral principle which should govern us, it is this moral principle that must govern us in suitable forms, suitable expressions. And that's how you get these great movements. There is in the United States today, despite the folly of that silly egotist, the president, there is a power which is far greater than anything he and his crowd represent in the United States today. The people of the United States have said, you are a bum. We don't like you. We're going to rip that mustache off from under your nose because you're threatened to kill us, to set the dogs upon us, to kill us by taking away our health care and murdering us in order to save your money. You save the money of the people who bought you, Mr. President, and may decide that they paid too high a price for this purchase of this worthless object. So that's the way things are going now. And therefore, the only way in which you correct this kind of problem is when a people are aroused, as the people of the United States in large numbers manifested this in their turnout in the month of August. They're aroused to a sense of a purpose, a higher purpose, to a higher morality. And then they insist, as the way that the people of Saxony, for example, brought down the Dédé regime, where the land of milk and honey was no longer milk and honey, and brought the regime down. You're now in a period where the American people are now desperate. You have seen in the month of August that a representation of a sample of 60% or more of the population despises this present administration. And the members of the Congress have been frightened by this scarecrow and have come in back into office trembling. Well, how am I going to do now? Tomorrow I could, a joint session of the Congress, what am I going to do? He's up there, he's looking at me, he's looking at me. What are we going to do? They're going to find the American people are still of that disposition. And that damn fool better learn real quick what the reality is. The American people are not going to tolerate this. And that is the government. That's the day on which politicians, which are bought and paid for by Wall Street, most of them are bought and paid for by Wall Street. What do they pay for Barney Frank? Whatever it was far too much. His services are not particularly desirable. So that's the reality of this. And what you have to do, and what I have to do, is we have to be governed by that. We have to be governed by our own conscience, but our own conscience is informed by we are a part of a people. I'm a part of a people. If I'm going to act to try to change things, I have to do it with the consent of the people. Huh? And therefore, that the people are speaking. And some people in Washington are not listening. The press is telling them it's not true, but it is true. We are headed for a crisis like humanity has not seen in its memory. About to break out on a global scale. We're about to go into a dark age beyond belief if you try to continue this system. The people say no. They don't want this to go into this system. They want out of this system. And they are a power which is greater than any combination of elected representatives. And you try to defy them, and you will find that they will speak. Because their very lives, the meaning of their lives, more than their lives itself, is the meaning of their lives that is being disgraced. You're taking our American people out there, you're taking their lives, you're destroying the meaning of their life. They will lay down their life for the meaning of their life, but they will not lay down the meaning of their life. And you're taking away the meaning of their life. Mr. President, you're a damn fool. I know you're ignorant, but even an ignorant man like you, Mr. President, shouldn't be such a damn fool. I'll try to save your butt.